Hello, everyone. Today I'm looking at the return of the Obra Dinn. This is a pretty interesting, funny little game. So basically, you play the role of being an insurer for the East India Company, and essentially, this ship, the Obra Dinn, has returned as a ghost ship. It set out with 60 people in, the 1800s sometime, and came back with none alive. And so, but aside from a typical ghost ship story, there are no ghosts. You basically climb aboard, and you have this special talisman, which will show you, the moments leading up to a person's death, and you're able to explore the environment and all the other characters within. So it's kind of a funny, cool thing where you essentially need to go in through all of these different stories and episodes, and essentially you start piecing together how each person died, and if you guess correctly, then you get an award at the end of the game. It shows how much is paid out depending on how they died, and also to be just accurate. But of course, as you go throughout this entire situation, you also unveil more of the story. What's really, really interesting is how it does this interdimensional autopsy, essentially, where you will have to put down you'll come across a skeleton, but within that skeleton's dream, you'll also find another dead body, which you can then jump into that person's death. And so there's multiple layers, essentially, of different deaths that you can go through. What's also very cool about the game is that for every single person, you also have to define who they were and how they died. And so each character has, a name, a title, and a country of origin. And so depending on those three attributes, you narrow them down based on their identity and how they died. Usually straightforward. There's a few times where I thought, I might have to use a guide, but there's a few times where I actually figured out, actually it was this person shooting from this angle, and so on and so forth. And it's really cool how they do this as well, because they essentially have there were no photographs back then, so they simply had one guy who was an artist on the ship who was simply drawing these scenes essentially, and so you use that as your main kind of mode of tracking who's who. And it's funny that each person's portrait becomes unblurred as you figure out who each person is slowly. What's also very rewarding and also somewhat difficult is that it only gives you a confirmation once you've done 3 in a row, or 3 in general. So, if you guess exactly the right name of the person and exactly, how they died, you need to get 3 of those in a row to actually essentially set them in the record, essentially. And then they become kind of official and you can't change them anymore. Honestly, for most of this game, I spent a lot of the time just kind of going through the environment, finding out people's situations, trying to put names down here and there. But by the end of the game, and it basically when it says, you're ready to leave the ship and it starts raining, I realized I put down maybe 25% of the people, while 75% are simply unknown. And at that point, I just started wild guessing, and that worked for a little bit. And then at a certain point, I really needed to use my brain. Speaking of, there's one guy that I'm really disappointed or angry at, because one of the people say, where's my Frenchman? And they say, he's been torn apart by the beast. And there is, in fact, a guy who is torn apart by the beast. He doesn't look French at all. And in fact, he's not the right guy. He's a completely different guy. And so that always really made me upset that they called him the Frenchman and that he was torn apart, because the guy who was the most torn apart by the beast, the only guy torn apart by the beast, at least that I can see, is not the guy he's referring to. He's referring to his second in command. And so it's a very funny thing where, by the end of the game, you might have in total maybe 10 names. So there's only they have 10 freebies, but the rest of them you kind of have to guess based on ethnicity and station. And so you start really studying the pictures and the drawings and people's their uniforms, their outfit, what they're wearing, and you use that to kind of figure out exactly who they are and what they're supposed to be doing. I thought for the longest the guy in the striped shirt was the cook. I was completely wrong. And there were some things that were very obvious, like the guy front and center with the big captain's hat is obviously the captain. And the game also has its own set of very distinct sounds using violins and trumpets and things like that. And so there'll be certain sound effects for when you're entering, the death dimension, other sound effects for when you've discovered a new lead within that dimension for another dead body, and also for when you chain together a series of, different guys. I would highly recommend, though, that you obviously don't watch any, footage of this game before you play, because otherwise you'll be totally spoiled for who's who and who goes where. Again, a lot of this stuff is, detective kind of stuff where you need to basically... Again, a lot of this is just normal detective stuff. You have to realize, oh, wait, no, who are the women on the ship? Who are the Chinese guys on the ship? Who are the portsmiths? Who are the midshipmen? And then you kind of have to learn, well, what is a midshipman? What is a gunner? What are all these different roles? And so, yeah, there are different kinds of, there's Chinese, Formosa, which I think is Thailand, Russian, English, German, Polish. There's a whole slew of different characters, ethnicities, and personalities. And from the way they talk, even from their accents, you can kind of make out who's who. There was one point, though, where it was really, really difficult to tell near the end, and it was just really, really, almost impossible. I didn't use a guide, though, because I was able to do certain tactics. So what ends up developing is the certain tactic you end up using is that for the people that you were absolutely certain of by the end of the game that is their identity, you only fill out one of them or two of them, so that if the next person you get by guessing and matching a bunch of names is also the right person, then it immediately triggers as yes, okay, you got it right, rather than having to just get those three or so people immediately and then just essentially starting over, and then having, even if you get one right, you don't know until you get three in a row. So that's very frustrating. Also, the game obviously has a very distinct visual style. In the settings, it's called Macintosh. I guess this is how Mac PCs used to look or something. And then there's a bunch of other settings which turns a blue, green, whatever, which are all based on, the Commodore and older, very old operating systems. What I was pleasantly surprised to see is that this game isn't just a total simulator. There are some mythological elements. There's a story where they come to this remote island and they obviously find something on it that they weren't supposed to find, and it's a cursed item, and there are mythological mermaid-like creatures and, kind of like a giant kraken kind of thing. What was also very interesting or hard at the end of the game is that there was a lot of guys who were MIA, and you actually had to figure out what happened to them because they're kind of in the background of a lot of these scenes, and you kind of have to be like, oh yeah, okay, that guy went overboard, or that guy was killed by this weird thing. But yeah, I mean, all in all, while this was a very entertaining game and I really liked investigating stuff, and it's very unique in its style, its setting, I felt that the music was a little bit repetitive. I felt the puzzles were maybe a little bit repetitive. And once you unveiled the whole story, it is kind of like, yeah, they found a weird item and now they don't have it anymore. There's no real deep story going on here, and the music isn't really superb. I mean, this was a fine game, but it feels almost a little bit better than a demo, not a full-on game. So I was honestly a little bit disappointed because while it was fun to solve, it didn't really have a lot of depth outside of that. It was just kind of like, oh, that was a cool distraction, I guess. But again, it doesn't take too long to beat. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much all I got to say about this one. It's a really interesting new idea, and I'd like to see this done in a slightly different manner or different style. I love murder mystery settings, and I think the way they operated this one was really cool. I just wish, again, the music and maybe setting and other things just were more interesting. But yeah, that's all I got to say for now, guys. See ya.